For 1,200 years, the devout, adventuresome, and merely curious have been streaming westward across Europe, all headed to a single spot in northwestern Spain. Peregrinos, the Spanish call them, pilgrims. And they make the trek, following guidebooks, both ancient and new, because the remains of this man, the Apostle St. James, are said to be buried here. Here is the story of just two from this throng on the Camino de Santiago, me, Tony Atherton, and my longtime friend, Chris West. Chris and I go back to grade school, but we spent a lot of time at this place, Brebeuf College School, where we were in plays together, wrote for the school newspaper together, and worked on the yearbook together. We even went on a kind of pilgrimage together to the Martyrs' Shrine in Midland. We also spent a lot of time in the cafeteria frantically doing the math homework we skipped the night before. Later, Chris was best man at my wedding. Long story short, we were pretty close. But life happens. My wife and our family moved to Ottawa, Prince Rupert, and Macau, China. Not in that precise order. While the Wests went from North Toronto to Port of Spain, Trinidad, and Papua New Guinea. Not in that precise order. We didn't see each other for decades. But our paths crossed again in recent years, and we found that we were still pretty darn compatible, so we thought we might be able to wander along the same path for 2.5 weeks or so.
Friends and people we've known and spent some time with have done it, or know people who've done it, and thought it was an interesting thing to do, and thought it might be a good thing to try, but never had the opportunity to really put it into place.
So we bought, begged, and borrowed our gear and started training. It was a poor spring for 20-kilometer walks, but we knew we were going to sunny Spain, so it would only get better. I had an extra couple of days, so I started my Camino just east of Leon, Spain, in a medieval walled village called Mansilla de las Mulas, about 335 kilometers from Santiago. The weather was lovely, and before I knew it, I was in a Leon albergue, or pilgrim hostel, run by the Benedictine nuns. Here's the nun who ran the place and reminded all her guests that they were on a pilgrimage, not a walk, and she expected them at the Pilgrim Blessing at 9 p.m. Of course I complied. The next day I booked a hotel in a plaza behind the cathedral and waited for Chris to arrive.
Arriving in Leon it's a beautiful city. The downtown old part, all the winding streets and the cathedral. And it was just a beautiful spot. And you were there in the hotel, so it made it nice and easy.
The next day we started following the yellow arrows that would take us to Santiago, starting with one right in front of the cathedral.
It was a bit exciting to finally put everything on after all the training and anticipation, and actually getting out there and walking.
Our first day together covered 22.5 kilometers to the village of Vilar de Mazarife. The walk wasn't bad, but the weather was not quite what we expected.
I thought of Spain as a dusty, flat, almost desert-type place with windmills and dry, warm weather. We certainly didn't have any dry, warm weather, nor did we really have flat terrain. That was very much an eye-opener.
We were happy to get into our albergue at the end of the day. At least it was dry, if not warm.
Well, an albergue is a shelter that pilgrims would find and spend the night, where you shared a room, depending on the size, with 8, 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 other people in beds and bunk beds. And usually the place would offer a pilgrim meal at night.
There was one albergue that stood out for us.
It had poured rain for a couple of days, and it was very cold. And as soon as we got there, they opened it up, and it was a very welcoming little courtyard area. And the young couple who were running it came from Madrid and decided this is what they wanted to do, is open a place for pilgrims. And they even put the heat on for us. And it was just very nice and cozy with a very great pilgrim meal that evening. The first course was an onion soup with bowls of cheese and bread to put in to make French onion soup, and it was delicious. And the second course was a stew of some sort with sausage, and it was very hot and nice. It's a bit spicy, but it was good. And the bread and wine kept going. You always had bottles of red wine at every meal. And then the dessert was a custard with sprinkled on top cinnamon in the shape of the arrow that became is the symbol, one of the symbols of the way.
Our days quickly fell into a routine.
You'd wake up, and it was usually between 6 and 6:30. You'd go and brush your teeth, do a bit of washing, pack up the backpack as well as you can. Look outside to see if it was pouring rain. Put the backpack on, put a coat on, put all the clothes on because it's usually very cool. And finally put on the poncho to cover everything, the hat, step outside with the walking sticks and start the journey.
We'd stop for a cafe Americano and a croissant after a couple of hours, then continue walking until noon or so. After finding an albergue and getting settled, we'd head out in search of lunch, hopefully at someplace warm. The afternoons were spent reading and napping, usually huddled under blankets. Dinner was at 7:30 or 8 p.m., and bedtime followed shortly after.
The day that filled me with the most emotion was about the fifth day in when we climbed to the top where the Iron Cross was that has been there for centuries, I guess, in various forms. And that's where you drop your pebbles or your shells that you've brought to release a burden or for whatever reason. Because it was a foggy, misty, rainy day, and it was a hard walk up to this. But all of a sudden you were there, and it was just, I would say, an emotional experience of being where hundreds and thousands of pilgrims have come for centuries and centuries to drop off stones at this cross, which is the highest point on the whole Camino.
The next day was Chris's birthday. As a treat, we arranged to send our packs ahead to the next albergue by taxi. Our feet had been taking a pounding. My left Achilles heel had developed tendonitis, and Chris's toes on his right foot were torn and bloody. Our bags were waiting for us in Travadello, where we rested before what was to be our most daunting day of the trek, which ended at a less than stellar albergue.
It was just a torturous climb to the top of this mountain. And you always thought you were at the top, and then all of a sudden the path made a turn and you had to go further up another mountain to get to it. But we had to line up, and it was a room with there were probably 60 people or 60 beds, I forget how many. And it was just so huge and so noisy and just not a welcoming place. It was very sterile.
But the carefully restored medieval-era village was pretty, and the views were stunning.
We entered Santiago probably an hour and a half before we finally ended up at the cathedral. It's just walking up and down and through the narrow streets, getting finally to view the cathedral in the distance. And that was exciting. And I guess just finishing the journey in the square out in front of the cathedral where we took pictures of each other was an exciting moment that finally, all the planning for months, and I guess thinking about it for years, finally getting there and feeling we're here, and what we attempted to accomplish, we had accomplished. But if people ask me for the future what the best part was getting reacquainted with you after 40 years and seeing that, boy, there was a reason why we'd become friends, because we kind of worked well together, and I don't think I could have done it with anyone else but you. So there you go.
Right back at you, Chris.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
It was great.
Thanks for coming with me.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.